As a game, it was fun. But Valentine didn't like some of the positions Peter made Demosthenes take. Demosthenes began to develop as a fairly paranoid anti-Russian writer. It bothered her because Peter was the one who knew how to exploit fear in his writing. She had to keep coming to him for ideas on how to do it. Meanwhile, his Locke followed her moderate, empathic strategies. It made sense in a way. By having her write Demosthenes, it meant he also had some empathy, just as Locke also could play on others' fears. But the main effect was to keep her inextricably tied to Peter. She couldn't go off and use Demosthenes for her own purposes. She wouldn't know how to use him. Still, it worked both ways. He couldn't write Locke without her. Or could he? I thought the idea was to unify the world. If I write like you say I should, Peter, I'm pretty much calling for war, to break up the Warsaw Pact. Not war, just open nets and the prohibition of interception. Free flow of information. Compliance with League rules, for heaven's sake. Without meaning to, Valentine started talking in Demosthenes' voice, even though she certainly wasn't speaking Demosthenes' opinions. Everyone knows that from the beginning of the League, the Second Warsaw Pact was to be regarded as a single entity where those rules were concerned. International free flow is still open. But between the Warsaw Pact nations, these things are internal matters. That was why they were willing to allow American hegemony in the League. You're arguing Locke's part, Val. Trust me. You have to call for the Warsaw Pact to lose official status. You have to get a lot of people really angry. Then, later, when you begin to recognize the need for compromise, then they stop listening to me and go off and fight a war. Val, trust me, I know what I'm doing. How do you know? You're not any smarter than me, and you've never done this before either. I'm 13, and you're 10, almost 11, and I know how these things work. All right, I'll do it your way, but I won't do any of these liberty or death things. You will too. And someday, when they catch us and they wonder why your sister was such a warmonger, I can just bet you'll tell them that you told me to do it. Are you sure you're not having a period, little woman? I hate you, Peter Wiggin. What bothered Valentine most was when her column got syndicated into several other regional news nets, and fathers started reading it and quoting from it at table. Finally, a man with some sense, he said. Then he quoted some of the passages Valentine hated worst in her own work. It's fine to work with these hegemonist Russians with the buggers out there, but after we win, I can't see leaving half the civilized world as virtual serfs in the Russian Empire. Can you, dear? I think you're taking this all too seriously, said Mother. I like this Demosthenes. I like the way he thinks. I'm surprised he isn't in the major nets. I looked for him in the international relations debates, and, he's never taken part in any of them. Valentine lost her appetite and left the table. Peter followed her after a respectable interval. So you don't like lying to Father, he said. So what? You're not lying to him. He doesn't think that you're really Demosthenes, and Demosthenes isn't saying things you really believe. They cancel each other out. They amount to nothing. That's the kind of reasoning that makes Locke such an ass. But what really bothered her was not that she was lying to Father. It was the fact that Father actually agreed with Demosthenes. She had thought that only fools would follow him. A few days later, Locke got picked up for a column in a New England newsnet, specifically to provide a contrasting view for their popular column from Demosthenes. Not bad for two kids who've only got about 8 pubic hairs between them, Peter said. It's a long way between writing a Newsnet column and ruling the world, Valentine reminded him. It's such a long way that no one has ever done it. They have, though, or the moral equivalent. I'm going to say snide things about Demosthenes in my first column. Well, Demosthenes isn't even going to notice that Locke exists. Ever. For now. With their identities now fully supported by their income from writing columns, they used Father's access now only for throwaway identities. Mother commented that they were spending too much time on the nets. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, she reminded Peter. Peter let his hand tremble a little, and he said, "If you think I should stop, I think I might be able to keep things under control this time. I really do." "No, no," Mother said. "I don't want you to stop. Just be careful, that's all." I'm careful, Mom."
Nothing was different. Nothing had changed in a year. Ender was sure of it, and yet it all seemed to have gone sour. He was still the leading soldier in the standings, and no one doubted that he deserved it now. At the age of 9, he was a toon leader in Phoenix Army, with Petra Arkanian as his commander. He still led his evening practice sessions, and now they were attended by an elite group of soldiers nominated by their commanders, though any launchy who wanted to could still come. Alai was also a toon leader in another army, and they were still good friends. Shen was not a leader, but that was no barrier. Dink Meeker had finally accepted command and succeeded Rose the Nose in Rat Army's command. All is going well, very well. I couldn't ask for anything better. So why do I hate my life? He went through the paces of the practices and games. He liked teaching the boys in his toon, and they followed him loyally. He had the respect of everyone, and he was treated with deference in his evening practices. Commanders came to study what he did. Other soldiers approached his table at mess and asked permission to sit down. Even the teachers were respectful. He had so much damn respect he wanted to scream. He watched the young kids in Petra's army, fresh out of their launch groups, watched how they played, how they made fun of their leaders when they thought no one was looking. He watched the camaraderie of old friends who had known each other in the battle school for years, who talked and laughed about old battles and long-graduated soldiers and commanders. But with his old friends there was no laughter, no remembering, just work. Just intelligence and excitement about the game, but nothing beyond that. Tonight it had come to a head in the evening practice. Ender and Alai were discussing the nuances of open space maneuvers when Shen came up and listened for a few moments, then suddenly took Alai by the shoulders and shouted, "Nova, Nova, Nova!" Alai burst out laughing, and for a moment or two Ender watched them remember together the battle where open room maneuvering had been for real, and they had dodged past the older boys, and suddenly they remembered that Ender was there. "Sorry, Ender," Shen said. "Sorry? For what? For being friends?" "I was there too, you know," Ender said. And they apologized again. Back to business, back to respect. And Ender realized that in their laughter, in their friendship, it had not occurred to them that he could have been included. How could they think I was part of it? Did I laugh? Did I join in? Just stood there, watching, like a teacher. That's how they think of me, too. Teacher, legendary soldier, not one of them. Not someone that you embrace and whisper salam in his ear. That only lasted while Ender still seemed a victim, still seemed vulnerable. Now he was the master soldier, and he was completely, utterly alone. Feel sorry for yourself, Ender. He typed the words on his desk as he lay on his bunk. Poor Ender. Then he laughed at himself and cleared away the words. Not a boy or girl in this school wouldn't be glad to trade places with me. He called up the fantasy game. He walked as he often did through the village that the dwarves had built in the hill made by the giant's corpse. It was easy to build sturdy walls with the ribs already curved just right, just enough space between them to leave windows. The whole corpse was cut into apartments opening onto the path down the giant's spine. The public amphitheater was carved into the pelvic bowl, and the common herd of ponies was pastured between the giant's legs. Ender was never sure what the dwarves were doing as they went about their business, but they left him alone as he picked his way through the village, and in return he did them no harm either. He vaulted the pelvic bone at the base of the public square and walked through the pasture. The ponies shied away from him. He did not pursue them. Ender did not understand how the game functioned anymore. In the old days, before he had first gone to the end of the world, everything was combat and puzzles to solve. Defeat the enemy before he kills you, or figure out how to get past the obstacle. Now, though, no one attacked. There was no war, and wherever he went, there was no obstacle at all. Except, of course, in the room in the castle at the end of the world. It was the one dangerous place left, and Ender, however often he vowed that he would not, always went back there, always killed the snake, always looked his brother in the face, and always, no matter what he did, died. It was no different this time. He tried to use the knife on the table to pry through the mortar and pull out a stone from the wall. As soon as he breached the seal of the mortar, water began to gush in through the crack, and Ender watched his desk as his figure, now out of his control, struggled madly to stay alive, to keep from drowning. The windows of his room were gone, the water rose, and his figure drowned. All the while, the face of Peter Wiggin in the mirror stayed and looked at him. I'm trapped here, Ender thought, trapped at the end of the world with no way out. And he knew at last the sour taste that had come to him despite all his successes in the battle school. It was despair.
There were uniformed men at the entrances to the school when Valentine arrived. They weren't standing like guards, but rather slouched around as if they were waiting for someone inside to finish his business. They wore the uniforms of IF Marines, the same uniforms that everyone saw in bloody combat on the videos. It lent an air of romance to this day at school. All the other kids were excited about it. Valentine was not. It made her think of Ender, for one thing, and for another, it made her afraid. Someone had recently published a savage commentary on Demosthenes' collected writings. The commentary, and therefore her work, had been discussed in the open conference of the International Relations Net, with some of the most important people of the day attacking and defending Demosthenes. What worried her most was the comment of an Englishman. Whether he likes it or not, Demosthenes cannot remain incognito forever. He has outraged too many wise men and pleased too many fools to hide behind his too appropriate pseudonym much longer. Either he will unmask himself in order to assume leadership of the forces of stupidity he has marshaled, or his enemies will unmask him in order to better understand the disease that has produced such a warped and twisted mind. Peter had been delighted, but then he would be. Valentine was afraid that enough powerful people had been annoyed by the vicious persona of Demosthenes that she would indeed be tracked down. The IF could do it, even if the American government was constitutionally bound not to. And here were IF troops gathered at Western Guilford Middle School, of all places. Not exactly the regular recruiting grounds for the IF Marines. She was not surprised to find a message marching around her desk as soon as she logged in. Please log off and go to Dr. Lineberry's office at once. Valentine waited nervously outside the principal's office until Dr. Lineberry opened the door and beckoned her inside. Her last doubt was removed when she saw the soft-bellied man in the uniform of an IF colonel sitting in the one comfortable chair in the room. "You're Valentine Wiggin?" he said. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm Colonel Graff. We've met before." Before? When had she had any dealings with the IF? "I've come to talk to you in confidence about your brother." It's not just me then, she thought. They have Peter. Or is this something new? Has he done something crazy? I thought he stopped doing crazy things. "Valentine, you seem frightened. There's no need to be. Please, sit down. I assure you that your brother is well. He has more than fulfilled our expectations." And now, with a great inward gush of relief, she realized that it was Ender they had come about. This must be the officer who had taken him away. Ender. It wasn't punishment at all. It was little Ender, who had disappeared so long ago, who was no part of Peter's plots now. You were the lucky one, Ender. You got away before Peter could trap you into his conspiracy. How do you feel about your brother, Valentine? Ender? Of course. How can I feel about him? I haven't seen him or heard from him since I was 8. Dr. Lineberry, will you excuse us? Lineberry was annoyed. On second thought, Dr. Lineberry, I think Valentine and I will have a much more productive conversation if we walk outside, away from the recording devices that your assistant principal has placed in this room. It was the first time Valentine had seen Dr. Lineberry speechless. Colonel Graff lifted a picture out from the wall and peeled a sound-sensitive membrane from the wall, along with its small broadcast unit. Cheap, said Graff, but effective. I thought you knew. Lineberry took the device and sat down heavily at her desk. Graff led Valentine outside. They walked out into the football field. The soldiers followed at a discreet distance. They split up and formed a large circle to guard them from the widest possible perimeter. Valentine, we need your help for Ender. What kind of help? We aren't even sure of that. We need you to help us figure out how you can help us. Well, what's wrong? That's part of the problem. We don't know. Valentine couldn't help but laugh. I haven't seen him in 3 years. You've got him up there with you all the time. Valentine, it costs more money than your father will make in his lifetime for me to fly to Earth and back to the battle school again. I don't commute casually. The king had a dream, said Valentine. But he forgot what it was. So he told his wise men to interpret the dream, or they'd die. Only Daniel could interpret it, because he was a prophet. You read the Bible? We're doing classics this year in advanced English. I'm not a prophet. I wish I could tell you everything about Ender's situation, but it would take hours, maybe days, and afterward I'd have to put you in protective confinement because so much of it is strictly confidential. So let's see what we can do with limited information. There's a game that our students play with the computer. And he told her about the end of the world and the closed room and the picture of Peter in the mirror. It's the computer that puts the picture there, not Ender. Why not ask the computer? The computer doesn't know. I'm supposed to know? This is the second time since Ender's been with us that he's taken this game to a dead end, to a game that seems to have no solution. Did he solve the first one? Eventually. Then give him time. He'll probably solve this one. I'm not sure. Valentine, your brother is a very unhappy little boy. Why? I don't know. You don't know much, do you? Valentine thought for a moment that the man might get angry. Instead, though, he decided to laugh. No, not much. Valentine, why would Ender keep seeing your brother Peter in the mirror? He shouldn't. It's stupid. Why is it stupid? Because if there's ever anybody who was the opposite of Ender, it's Peter. How? Valentine could not think of a way to answer him that wasn't dangerous. Too much questioning about Peter could lead to real trouble. Valentine knew enough about the world to know that no one would take Peter's plans for world domination seriously as a danger to existing governments, but they might well decide that he was insane and needed treatment for his megalomania. You're preparing to lie to me, Graff said. I'm preparing not to talk to you anymore, Valentine answered. And you're afraid. Why are you afraid? I don't like questions about my family. Just leave my family out of this. Valentine, I'm trying to leave your family out of this. I'm coming to you so that I don't have to start a battery of tests on Peter and question your parents. I'm trying to solve this problem now, with the person Ender loves and trusts most in the world, perhaps the only person he loves and trusts at all. If we can't solve it this way, then we'll sequester your family and do as we like from then on. This is not a trivial matter, and I won't just go away. The only person Ender loves and trusts at all. She felt a deep stab of pain, a regret, of shame, that now it was Peter she was close to. Peter, who was the center of her life. For you, Ender, I light fires on your birthday. For Peter, I help fulfill all his dreams. I never thought you were a nice man, not when you came to take Ender away, and not now. Don't pretend to be an ignorant little girl. I saw your tests when you were little, and at the present moment there aren't very many college professors who could keep up with you. Ender and Peter hate each other. I knew that. You said they were opposites. Why? Peter can be hateful sometimes. Hateful in what way? Mean, just mean, that's all. Valentine, for Ender's sake, tell me what he does when he's being mean. He threatens to kill people a lot. He doesn't mean it. But when we were little, Ender and I were both afraid of him. He told us he'd kill us. Actually, he told us he'd kill Ender. We monitored some of that. It was because of the monitor. Is that all? Tell me more about Peter. So she told him about the children in every school that Peter attended. He never hit them, but he tortured them just the same, found what they were most ashamed of, and told it to the person whose respect they most wanted, found what they most feared, and made sure they faced it often. Did he do this with Ender? Valentine shook her head. Are you sure? Didn't Ender have a weak place? A thing he feared most, or that he was ashamed of? Ender never did anything to be ashamed of. And suddenly, deep in her own shame for having forgotten and betrayed Ender, she started to cry. Why are you crying? She shook her head. She couldn't explain what it was like to think of her little brother, who was so good, whom she had protected for so long, and then remember that now she was Peter's ally, Peter's helper, Peter's slave in a scheme that was completely out of her control. Ender never surrendered to Peter, but I have turned. I've become part of him, as Ender never was. Ender never gave in, she said. To what? To Peter. To being like Peter. They walked in silence along the goal line. How would Ender ever be like Peter? Valentine shuddered. I already told you. But Ender never did that kind of thing. He was just a little boy. We both wanted to, though. We both wanted to kill Peter. Ah. No, that isn't true. We never said it. Ender never said that he wanted to do that. I just thought it. It was me, not Ender. He never said that he wanted to kill him. What did he want? He just didn't want to be... To be what? Peter tortures squirrels. He stakes them out on the ground and skins them alive and sits and watches them until they die. He did that for a while after Ender left. He doesn't do it now, but he did it. If Ender knew that, if Ender saw him, I think he'd what? Rescue the squirrels? Try to heal them? No, in those days you didn't undo what Peter did. You didn't cross him, but Ender would be kind to squirrels. Do you understand? He'd feed them. But if he fed them, they'd become tame, and that much easier for Peter to catch. Valentine began to cry again. No matter what you do, it always helps, Peter. Everything helps, Peter. Everything. You just can't get away no matter what. Are you helping Peter? Asked Graf. She didn't answer. Is Peter such a very bad person, Valentine? She nodded. Is Peter the worst person in the world? How can he be? I don't know. He's the worst person I know. And yet you and Ender are his brother and sister. You have the same genes, the same parents. How can he be so bad if... Valentine turned and screamed at him. Screamed as if he were killing her. Ender is not like Peter. He is not like Peter in any way. Except that he's smart, that's all. In every other way a person could possibly be like Peter, he is nothing like Peter. Nothing. I see, said Graf. I know what you're thinking, you bastard. You're thinking I'm wrong, that Ender's like Peter. Well, maybe I'm like Peter, but Ender isn't. He isn't at all. I used to tell him that when he cried. I told him that lots of times. You're not like Peter. You never like to hurt people. You're kind and good. And not like Peter at all. And it's true. His acquiescence calmed her. Damn right it's true. It's true. Valentine, will you help Ender? I can't do anything for him now. It's really the same thing you always did for him before. Just comfort him and tell him that he never likes to hurt people, that he's good and kind and not like Peter at all. That's the most important thing, that he's not like Peter at all. I can see him? No, I want you to write a letter. What good does that do? Ender never answered a single letter I sent. Graf sighed. He, answered every letter he got. It took only a second for her to understand. You really stink. Isolation is the optimum environment for creativity. It was his ideas we wanted, not the... Oh, never mind. I don't have to defend myself to you. Then why are you doing it? She did not ask. But he's slacking off. He's coasting. We want to push him forward, and he won't go. Maybe I'd be doing Ender a favor if I told you to go stuff yourself. You already helped me. You can help me more. Write to him. Promise you won't cut out anything I write? I won't promise any such thing. Then forget it. No problem. I'll write your letter myself. We can use your other letters to reconcile the writing styles. Simple matter. I want to see him. He gets his first leave when he's 18. You told him it would be when he was 12. We changed the rules. Why should I help you? Don't help me. Help Ender. What does it matter if that helps us, too? What kind of terrible things are you doing to him up there? Graf chuckled. Valentine, my dear little girl, The terrible things are only about to begin.
Ender was 4 lines into the letter before he realized that it wasn't from one of the other soldiers in battle school. It had come in the regular way, a mail-waiting message when he signed into his desk. He read 4 lines into it, then skipped to the end and read the signature. Then he went back to the beginning and curled up on his bed to read the words over and over again.
Ender, the bastards wouldn't put any of my letters through till now. I must have written 100 times, but you must have thought I never did. Well, I did. I haven't forgotten you. I remember your birthday. I remember everything. Some people might think that because you're being a soldier, you are now a cruel and hard person who likes to hurt people, like the Marines in the videos, but I know that isn't true. You are nothing like you-know-who. He's nicer seeming, but he's still a slum bitch inside. Maybe you seem mean, but it won't fool me. Still paddling the old canoe. All my love, turkey lips. Val. Don't write back. They'll probably psychoanalyze your letter.
Obviously, it was written with the full approval of the teachers, but there was no doubt it was written by Val. The spelling of psychoanalyze, S-I-K-O-W-A-N-A-L-I-Z-E, the epithet slum bitch for Peter, the joke about pronouncing new like canoe, were all things that no one could know but Val. And yet, they came pretty thick, as though someone wanted to make very sure that Ender believed that the letter was genuine. Why should they be so eager if it's the real thing? It isn't the real thing anyway. Even if she wrote it in her own blood, it isn't the real thing because they made her write it. She'd written before, and they didn't let any of those letters through. Those might have been real, but this was asked for. This was part of their manipulation. And the despair filled him again. Now he knew why. Now he knew what he hated so much. He had no control over his own life. They ran everything. They made all the choices. Only the game was left to him, that was all. Everything else was them and their rules and plans and lessons and programs, and all he could do was go this way or that way in battle. The one real thing, the one precious real thing was his memory of Valentine. The person who loved him before he ever played a game, who loved him whether there was a bugger war or not, and they had taken her and put her on their side. She was one of them now. He hated them and all their games, hated them so badly that he cried, reading Val's empty, asked-for letter again. The other boys in Phoenix Army noticed and looked away. Ender Wiggin crying. That was disturbing. Something terrible was going on. The best soldier in any army lying on his bunk, crying. The silence in the room was deep. Ender deleted the letter, wiped it out of memory, and then punched up the fantasy game. He was not sure why he was so eager to play the game, to get to the end of the world, but he wasted no time getting there. Only when he coasted on the clouds, skimming over the autumnal colors of the pastoral world, only then did he realize what he hated most about Val's letter. All that it said was about Peter, about how he was not at all like Peter. The words she had said so often as she held him comforted him as he trembled in fear and rage and loathing after Peter had tortured him. That was all that the letter had said. And that was what they had asked for. The bastards knew about that, and they knew about Peter in the mirror in the castle room. They knew about everything, and to them Val was just one more tool to use to control him, just one more trick to play. Dink was right. They were the enemy. They loved nothing and cared for nothing, and he was not going to do what they wanted. He was damn well not going to do anything for them. He had had only one memory that was safe, one good thing, and those bastards had plowed it into him with the rest of the manure, and so he was finished. He wasn't going to play. As always, the serpent waited in the tower room, unraveling itself from the rug on the floor. But this time Ender didn't grind it underfoot. This time he caught it in his hands, knelt before it, and gently, so gently, brought the snake's gaping mouth to his lips and kissed. He had not meant to do that. He had meant to let the snake bite him on the mouth. Or perhaps he had meant to eat the snake alive, as Peter in the mirror had done, with his bloody chin and the snake's tail dangling from his lips, but he kissed it instead. And the snake in his hands thickened and bent into another shape, a human shape. It was Valentine, and she kissed him again. The snake could not be Valentine. He had killed it too often for it to be his sister. Peter had devoured it too often for Ender to bear it, that it might have been Valentine all along. Was this what they planned when they let him read her letter? He didn't care. She arose from the floor of the tower room and walked to the mirror. Ender made his figure also rise and go with her. They stood before the mirror, where instead of Peter's cruel reflection there stood a dragon and a unicorn. Ender reached out his hand and touched the mirror, and so did Valentine. The wall fell open and revealed a great stairway downward, carpeted and lined with shouting, cheering multitudes. Together, arm in arm, he and Valentine walked down the stairs. Tears filled his eyes, tears of relief that at last he had broken free of the room at the end of the world, and because of the tears he didn't notice that every member of the multitude wore Peter's face. He only knew that wherever he went in this world, Valentine was with him.
Valentine opened the letter that Dr. Lineberry had given her. "Dear Valentine," it said, "we thank you and commend you for your efforts on behalf of the war effort. You are hereby notified that you have been awarded the Star of the Order of the League of Humanity, First Class, which is the highest military award that can be given to a civilian. Unfortunately, IF security forbids us to make this award public until after the successful conclusion of current operations, but we want you to know that your efforts resulted in complete success. Sincerely, General Shimon Levy, Strategos." When she had read it twice, Dr. Lineberry took it from her hands. "I was instructed to let you read it and then destroy it." She took a cigarette lighter from a drawer and set the paper afire. It burned brightly in the ashtray. "Was it good or bad news?" she asked. "I sold my brother," Valentine said, "and they paid me for it." "Well, that's a bit melodramatic, isn't it, Valentine?" Valentine went back to class without answering. That night, Demosthenes published a scathing denunciation of the population limitation laws. People should be allowed to have as many children as they like, and the surplus population should be sent to other worlds to spread mankind so far across the galaxy that no disaster, no invasion could ever threaten the human race with annihilation. "The most noble title any child can have," Demosthenes wrote, "is third." "For you, Ender," she said to herself as she wrote. Peter laughed in delight when he read it. "That'll make him sit up and take notice. Third, a noble title. Oh, you have a wicked streak."
Now?
I suppose so.
It has to be an order, Colonel Graff. Armies don't move because a commander says, "I suppose it's time to attack."
I'm not a commander. I'm a teacher of little children.
Colonel, sir, I admit I was on you. I admit I was a pain in the ass, but it worked. Everything worked just like you wanted it to. The last few weeks, Ender's even been
Happy.
content. He's doing well. His mind is keen, his play is excellent. Young as he is, we've never had a boy better prepared for command. Usually they go at 11, but at 9.5 he's top flight.
Well, yes. For a few minutes there, it actually occurred to me to wonder what kind of a man would heal a broken child of some of his hurt, just so he could throw him back into battle again. A little private moral dilemma. Please overlook it. I was tired.
Saving the world, remember?
Call him in.
We're doing what must be done, Colonel Graff.
Come on, Anderson. You're just dying to see how he handles all those rigged games I had you work out.
That's a pretty low thing to...
So I'm a low kind of guy. Come on, Major. We're both the scum of the earth. I'm dying to see how he handles them, too. After all, our lives depend on him doing real well, nay?
You're not starting to use the boy's slang, are you?
Call him in, Major. I'll dump the rosters into his files and give him his security system. What we're doing to him isn't all bad, you know. He gets his privacy again.
Isolation, you mean?
The loneliness of power. Go call him in.
Yes, sir. I'll be back with him in 15 minutes.
Goodbye. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I hope you had fun. I hope you had a nice time being happy, Ender. Might be the last time in your life. Welcome, little boy. Your dear Uncle Graff has plans for you.
Ender knew what was happening from the moment they brought him in. Everyone expected him to go commander early. Perhaps not this early, but he had topped the standings almost continuously for 3 years. No one else was remotely close to him, and his evening practices had become the most prestigious group in the school. There were some who wondered why the teachers had waited this long. He wondered which army they'd give him. 3 commanders were graduating soon, including Petra, but it was beyond hope for them to give him Phoenix Army. No one ever succeeded to command of the same army he was in when he was promoted. Anderson took him first to his new quarters. That sealed it. Only commanders had private rooms. Then he had him fitted for new uniforms and a new flash suit. He looked on the forms to discover the name of his army. Dragon, said the form. There was no Dragon Army. I've never heard of Dragon Army, Ender said. That's because there hasn't been a Dragon Army in 4 years. We discontinued the name because there was a superstition about it. No Dragon Army in the history of the battle school ever won even a third of its games. It's got to be a joke. Well, why are you reviving it now? We had a lot of extra uniforms to use up. Graff sat at his desk looking fatter and wearier than the last time Ender had seen him. He handed Ender his hook, the small box that allowed commanders to go where they wanted in the battle room during exercises. Some said they worked magnetically, some said it was gravity. Many times during his evening practice sessions, Ender had wished that he had a hook instead of having to rebound off walls to get where he wanted to go. Now that he'd got quite deft at maneuvering without one, here it was. It only works, Anderson pointed out, during your regularly scheduled practice sessions. Since Ender already planned to have extra practices, it meant the hook would only be useful some of the time. It also explained why so many commanders never held extra practices. They depended on the hook, and it wouldn't do anything for them during the extra times. If they felt that the hook was their authority, their power over the other boys, then they were even less likely to work without it. That's an advantage I'll have over some of my enemies, Ender thought. Graff's official welcome speech sounded bored and over-rehearsed. Only at the end did he begin to sound interested in his own words. We're doing something unusual with Dragon Army, I hope you don't mind. We've assembled a new army by advancing the equivalent of an entire launch course early and delaying the graduation of quite a few advanced students. I think you'll be pleased with the quality of your soldiers. I hope you are, because we're forbidding you to transfer any of them. No trades? Asked Ender. It was how commanders always shored up their weak points, by trading around. None. You see, You've been conducting your extra practice sessions for 3 years now. You have a following. Many good soldiers would put unfair pressure on their commanders to trade them into your army. We've given you an army that can, in time, be competitive. We have no intention of letting you dominate unfairly. What if I've got a soldier I just can't get along with? Get along with him. Graf closed his eyes. Anderson stood up, and the interview was over. Dragon was assigned the colors gray, orange, gray. Ender changed into his flash suit, then followed the ribbons of light until he came to the barracks that contained his army. They were there already, milling around near the entrance. Ender took charge at once. Bunking will be arranged by seniority. Veterans to the back of the room, newest soldiers to the front. It was the reverse of the usual pattern, and Ender knew it. He also knew that he didn't intend to be like many commanders who never even saw the younger boys because they were always in the back. As they sorted themselves out according to their arrival dates, Ender walked up and down the aisle. Almost 30 of his soldiers were new, straight out of their launch group, completely inexperienced in battle. Some were even underage. The ones nearest the door were pathetically small. Ender reminded himself that that's how he must have looked to Bonzo Madrid when he first arrived. Still, Bonzo had had only one underage soldier to cope with. Not one of the veterans belonged to Ender's elite practice group. None had ever been a toon leader. None, in fact, was older than Ender himself, which meant that even his veterans didn't have more than 18 months' experience. Some he didn't even recognize. They had made so little impression. They recognized Ender, of course, since he was the most celebrated soldier in the school, and some, Ender could see, resented him. At least they did me one favor. None of my soldiers is older than me. As soon as each soldier had a bunk, Ender ordered them to put on their flash suits and come to practice. We're on the morning schedule, straight to practice after breakfast. Officially, you have a free hour between breakfast and practice. We'll see what happens after I find out how good you are. After 3 minutes, though many of them still weren't dressed, he ordered them out of the room. "But I'm naked," said one boy. "Dress faster next time. 3 minutes from first call to running out the door. That's the rule this week. Next week, the rule is 2 minutes. Move." It would soon be a joke in the rest of the school that Dragon Army was so dumb they had to practice getting dressed. 5 of the boys were completely naked, carrying their flash suits as they ran through the corridors. Few were fully dressed. They attracted a lot of attention as they passed open classroom doors. No one would be late again if he could help it. In the corridors leading to the battle room, Ender made them run back and forth in the halls, fast, so they were sweating a little, while the naked ones got dressed. Then he led them to the upper door, the one that opened into the middle of the battle room, just like the doors in the actual games. Then he made them jump up and use the ceiling handholds to hurl themselves into the room. "Assemble on the far wall," he said, "as if you were going for the enemy's gate." They revealed themselves as they jumped, 4 at a time, through the door. Almost none of them knew how to establish a direct line to the target, and when they reached the far wall, few of the new ones had any idea how to catch on or even control their rebounds. The last boy out was a small kid, obviously underage. There was no way he was going to reach the ceiling handhold. "You can use a side handhold if you want," Ender said. "Go suck on it," said the boy. He took a flying leap, touched the ceiling handhold with a fingertip, and hurtled through the door with no control at all, spinning in 3 directions at once. Ender tried to decide whether to like the little kid for refusing to take a concession or to be annoyed at his insubordinate attitude. They finally got themselves together along the wall. Ender noticed that without exception they had lined up with their heads still in the direction that had been up in the corridor. So Ender deliberately took hold of what they were treating as a floor and dangled from it upside down. "Why are you upside down, soldier?" he demanded. Some of them started to turn the other way. "'Tention!" They held still. "I said, why are you upside down?" No one answered. They didn't know what he expected. "I said, why does every one of you have his feet in the air and his head toward the ground?" Finally, one of them spoke. "Sir, this is the direction we were in coming out of the door." "Well, what difference is that supposed to make? What difference does it make what the gravity was back in the corridor? Are we going to fight in the corridor? Is there any gravity here?" "No, sir. No, sir." From now on, you forget about gravity before you go through that door. The old gravity is gone, erased. Understand me? Whatever your gravity is, when you get to the door, remember, the enemy's gate is down. Your feet are toward the enemy gate. Up is toward your own gate. North is that way. South is that way. East is that way. West is what way? They pointed. That's what I expected. The only process you've mastered is the process of elimination, and the only reason you've mastered that is because you can do it in the toilet. What was that circus I saw out here? Did you call that forming up? Did you call that flying? Now, everybody, launch and form up on the ceiling. Right now. Move. As Ender expected, a good number of them instinctively launched, not toward the wall with the door in it, but toward the wall that Ender had called north, the direction that had been up when they were in the corridor. Of course, they quickly realized their mistake, but too late. They had to wait to change things until they had rebounded off the north wall. In the meantime, Ender was mentally grouping them into slow learners and fast learners. The littlest kid, the one who had been last out of the door, was the first to arrive at the correct wall, and he caught himself adroitly. They had been right to advance him. He'd do well. He was also cocky and rebellious, and probably resented the fact that he had been one of the ones Ender had sent naked through the corridors. "You," said Ender, pointing at the small one. "Which way is down?" "Toward the enemy door." The answer was quick. It was also surly, as if to say, okay, now get on with the important stuff. "Name, kid?" "This soldier's name is Bean, sir." "Get that for size or for brains?" The other boys laughed a little. "Well, Bean, you're right onto things. Now listen to me, because this matters. Nobody's going to get through that door without a good chance of getting hit. In the old days, you had 10, 20 seconds before you even had to move. Now, if you aren't already streaming out of the door when the enemy comes out, you're frozen. Now, what happens when you're frozen?" "Can't move," one of the boys said. "That's what frozen means," Ender said. "But what happens to you?" It was Bean, not intimidated at all, who answered intelligently. "You keep going in the direction you started in, at the speed you were going when you were flashed." "That's true." "You 5, they're on the end. Move." Startled, the boys looked at each other. Ender flashed them all. "The next 5, move." They moved. Ender flashed them, too, but they kept moving, heading toward the walls. The first 5, though, were drifting uselessly near the main group. "Look at these, so-called soldiers," Ender said. "Their commander ordered them to move, and now look at them. Not only are they frozen, they're frozen right here, where they can get in the way, while the others, because they moved when they were ordered, are frozen down there, plugging up the enemy's lanes, blocking the enemy's vision. I imagine that about 5 of you have understood the point of this. And no doubt Bean is one of them, right, Bean?" He didn't answer at first. Ender looked at him until he said, "Right, sir." "Then what is the point?" "When you are ordered to move, move fast, so if you get iced you'll bounce around instead of getting in the way of your own army's operations." "Excellent. At least I have one soldier who can figure things out." Ender could see resentment growing in the way the other soldiers shifted their weight and glanced at each other, the way they avoided looking at Bean. Why am I doing this? What does this have to do with being a good commander, making one boy the target of all the others? Just because they did it to me, why should I do it to him? Ender wanted to undo his taunting of the boy, wanted to tell the others that the little one needed their help and friendship more than anyone else. But of course Ender couldn't do that. Not on the first day. On the first day, even his mistakes had to look like part of a brilliant plan. Ender hooked himself near the wall and pulled one of the boys away from the others. "Keep your body straight," said Ender. He rotated the boy in midair so his feet pointed toward the others. When the boy kept moving his body, Ender flashed him. The others laughed. "How much of his body could you shoot?" Ender asked the boy directly under the frozen soldier's feet. "Mostly all I can hit is his feet." Ender turned to the boy next to him. "What about you?" "I can see his body." "And you?" A boy a little farther down the wall answered, "All of him." "Feet aren't very big. Not much protection." Ender pushed the frozen soldier out of the way. Then he doubled his legs under him as if he were kneeling in midair and flashed his own legs. Immediately the legs of his suit went rigid, holding them in that position. Ender twisted himself in the air so that he knelt above the other boys. "What do you see?" he asked. "A lot less," they said. Ender thrust his gun between his legs. "I can see fine," he said, and proceeded to flash the boys directly under him. "Stop me," he shouted. "Try and flash me." They finally did, but not until he had flashed more than a third of them. He thumbed his hook and thawed himself and every other frozen soldier. "Now," he said, "which way is the enemy's gate?" "Down." "And what is our attack position?" Some started to answer with words, but Bean answered by flipping himself away from the wall with his legs doubled under him, straight toward the opposite wall, flashing between his legs all the way. For a moment Ender wanted to shout at him, to punish him. Then he caught himself, rejected the ungenerous impulse. Why should I be so angry at this little boy? "Is Bean the only one who knows how?" Ender shouted. Immediately the entire army pushed off toward the opposite wall, kneeling in the air, firing between their legs, shouting at the top of their lungs. There may be a time, thought Ender, when this is exactly the strategy I'll need. 40 screaming boys in an unbalancing attack. When they were all at the other side, Ender called for them to attack him all at once. Yes, thought Ender, not bad. They gave me an untrained army with no excellent veterans, but at least it isn't a crop of fools. I can work with this. When they were assembled again, laughing and exhilarated, Ender began the real work. He had them freeze their legs in the kneeling position. "Now, what are your legs good for in combat?" "Nothing," said some boys. "Bean doesn't think so," said Ender. "They're the best way to push off walls." "Right," Ender said. The other boys started to complain that pushing off walls was movement, not combat. "There is no combat without movement," Ender said. They fell silent and hated Bean a little more. "Now, with your legs frozen like this, can you push off walls?" No one dared answer for fear they'd be wrong. "Bean?" asked Ender. "I've never tried it, but maybe if you faced the wall and doubled over at the waist." "Right, but wrong. Watch me. My back's to the wall, legs are frozen. Since I'm kneeling, my feet are against the wall. Usually when you push off, you have to push downward. So you string out your body behind you like a string bean, right?" Laughter. "But with my legs frozen, I use pretty much the same force, pushing downward from the hips and thighs, only now it pushes my shoulders and my feet backward, shoots out my hips, and when I come loose, my body's tight, nothing stringing out behind me. Watch this." Ender forced his hips forward, which shot him away from the wall. In a moment he readjusted his position and was kneeling, legs downward, rushing toward the opposite wall. He landed on his knees, flipped over on his back, and jackknifed off the wall in another direction. "Shoot me!" he shouted. Then he set himself spinning in the air as he took a course roughly parallel to the boys along the far wall. Because he was spinning, they couldn't get a continuous beam on him. He thawed his suit and hooked himself back to them. That's what we're working on for the first half hour today. Build up some muscles you didn't know you had. Learn to use your legs as a shield and control your movements so you can get that spin. Spinning doesn't do any good up close, but far away, they can't hurt you if you're spinning. At that distance, the beam has to hit the same spot for a couple of moments, and if you're spinning, it can't happen. Now freeze yourself and get started. "Aren't you going to assign lanes?" asked the boy. "No, I'm not going to assign lanes. I want you bumping into each other and learning how to deal with it all the time, except when we're practicing formations, and then I'll usually have you bump into each other on purpose. Now move." When he said move, they moved. Ender was the last one out after practice, since he stayed to help some of the slower ones improve on technique. They'd had good teachers, but the inexperienced soldiers, fresh out of their launch groups, were completely helpless when it came to doing 2 or 3 things at the same time. It was fine to practice jackknifing with frozen legs. They had no trouble maneuvering in midair, but to launch in one direction, fire in another, spin twice, rebound with a jackknife off a wall, and come out firing facing the right direction, that was way beyond them. Drill, 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 that was all Ender would be able to do with them for a while. Strategies and formations were nice, but they were nothing if the soldiers didn't know how to handle themselves in battle. He had to get this army ready now. He was early at being a commander, and the teachers were changing the rules now, not letting him trade, giving him no top-notch veterans. There was no guarantee that they'd give him the usual 3 months to get his army together before sending them into battle. At least in the evenings he'd have Alai and Shen to help him train his new boys. He was still in the corridor leading out of the battle room when he found himself face to face with little Bean. Bean looked angry. Ender didn't want problems right now. "Ho, Bean. Ho, Ender." Pause. "Sir," Ender said softly. "I know what you're doing, Ender, sir, and I'm warning you." "Warning me?" "I can be the best man you've got, but don't play games with me." "Or what?" "Or I'll be the worst man you've got, one or the other." "And what do you want? Love and kisses?" Ender was getting angry now. Bean looked unworried. "I want a tune." Ender walked back to him and stood looking down into his eyes. "Why should you get a tune?" "Because I'd know what to do with it." "Knowing what to do with a tune is easy," Ender said. "It's getting them to do it that's hard. Why would any soldier want to follow a little pinprick like you?" "They used to call you that, I hear. I hear Bonzo Madrid still does." "I asked you a question, soldier." "I'll earn their respect, sir, if you don't stop me." Ender grinned. "I'm helping you." "Like hell," said Bean. "Nobody would notice you except to feel sorry for the little kid, but I made sure they all noticed you today. They'll be watching every move you make. All you have to do to earn their respect now is be perfect." "So I don't even get a chance to learn before I'm being judged?" "Poor kid. Nobody's treating him fair." Ender gently pushed Bean back against the wall. "I'll tell you how to get a tune. Prove to me that you know what you're doing as a soldier. Prove to me that you know how to use other soldiers, and then prove to me that somebody's willing to follow you into battle. Then you'll get your tune. But not bloody well until." Bean smiled. "That's fair. If you actually work that way, I'll be a tune leader in a month." Ender reached down and grabbed the front of his uniform and shoved him into the wall. "When I say I work a certain way, Bean, then that's the way I work." Bean just smiled. Ender let go of him and walked away. When he got to his room, he lay down on his bed and trembled. "What am I doing? My first practice session, and I'm already bullying people the way Bonzo did. And Peter, shoving people around. Picking on some poor little kid so the others will have somebody they all hate. Sickening. Everything I hated in a commander, and I'm doing it. Is it some law of nature that you inevitably become whatever your first commander was? I can quit right now if that's so." Over and over he thought of the things he did and said in his first practice with his new army. Why couldn't he talk like he always did in his evening practice group? No authority except excellence. Never had to give orders, just made suggestions. But that wouldn't work, not with an army. His informal practice group didn't have to learn to do things together. They didn't have to develop a group feeling. They never had to learn how to hold together and trust each other in battle. They didn't have to respond instantly to commands. And he could go to the other extreme, too. He could be as lax and incompetent as Rose the Nose, if he wanted. He could make stupid mistakes no matter what he did. He had to have discipline, and that meant demanding and getting quick, decisive obedience. He had to have a well-trained army, and that meant drilling the soldiers over and over again, long after they thought they had mastered a technique, until it was so natural to them that they didn't have to think about it anymore. But what was this thing with Bean? Why had he gone for the smallest, weakest, and possibly the brightest of the boys? Why had he done to Bean what had been done to Ender by commanders that he despised? Then he remembered that it hadn't begun with his commanders. Before Rose and Bonzo treated him with contempt, he had been isolated in his launch group, and it wasn't Bernard who began that either. It was Graf. It was the teachers who had done it, and it wasn't an accident. Ender realized that now. It was a strategy. Graf had deliberately set him up to be separate from the other boys, made it impossible for him to be close to them. And he began now to suspect the reasons behind it. It wasn't to unify the rest of the group. In fact, it was divisive. Graf had isolated Ender to make him struggle, to make him prove not that he was competent, but that he was far better than everyone else. That was the only way he could win respect and friendship. It made him a better soldier than he would ever have been otherwise. It also made him lonely, afraid, angry, untrusting, and maybe those traits, too, made him a better soldier. That's what I'm doing to you, Bean. I'm hurting you to make you a better soldier in every way, to sharpen your wit, to intensify your effort, to keep you off balance, never sure what's going to happen next, so you always have to be ready for anything, ready to improvise, determined to win no matter what. I'm also making you miserable. That's why they brought you to me, Bean. So you could be just like me. So you could grow up to be just like the old man. And me, am I supposed to grow up like Graf? Fat and sour and unfeeling, manipulating the lives of little boys so they turn out factory perfect, generals and admirals ready to lead the fleet in defense of the homeland. You get all the pleasures of the puppeteer until you get a soldier who can do more than anyone else. You can't have that. It spoils the symmetry. You must get him in line, break him down, isolate him, beat him until he gets in line with everyone else. Well, what I've done to you this day, Bean, I've done. But I'll be watching you, more compassionately than you know, and when the time is right, you'll find that I'm your friend, and you are the soldier you want to be. Ender did not go to classes that afternoon. He lay on his bunk and wrote down his impressions of each of the boys in his army, the things he noticed right about them, the things that needed more work. In practice tonight he would talk with a lie, and they'd figure out ways to teach small groups the things they needed to know. At least he wouldn't be in this thing alone. But when Ender got to the battle room that night, while most others were still eating, he found Major Anderson waiting for him. There's been a rule change, Ender. From now on, only members of the same army may work together in a battle room during free time, and therefore battle rooms are available only on a scheduled basis. After tonight, your next turn is in 4 days. Nobody else is holding extra practices. They are now, Ender. Now that you command another army, they don't want their boys practicing with you. Surely you can understand that. So they'll conduct their own practices. I've always been in another army from them. They still sent their soldiers to me for training. You weren't commander then. You gave me a completely green army, Major Anderson. Sir, you have quite a few veterans. They aren't any good. Nobody gets here without being brilliant, Ender. Make them good. I needed a Lai and Shen to... It's about time you grew up and did some things on your own, Ender. You don't need these other boys to hold your hand. You're a commander now, so kindly act like it, Ender. Ender walked past Anderson toward the battle room. Then he stopped, turned, asked a question. Since these evening practices are now regularly scheduled, does it mean that I can use the hook? Did Anderson almost smile? No, not a chance of that. We'll see, he said. Ender turned his back and went on into the battle room. Soon his army arrived, and no one else. Either Anderson waited around to intercept anyone coming to Ender's practice group, or word had already passed through the whole school that Ender's informal evenings were through. It was a good practice. They accomplished a lot. But at the end of it, Ender was tired and lonely. There was a half hour before bedtime. He couldn't go into his army's barracks. He had long since learned that the best commanders stay away unless they have some reason to visit. The boys have to have a chance to be at peace, at rest, without someone listening, to favor or despise them depending on the way they talk and act and think. So he wandered to the game room, where a few other boys were using the last half hour before final bell to settle bets or beat their previous scores on the games. None of the games looked interesting, but he played one anyway, an easy animated game designed for launchies. Bored, he ignored the objectives of the game and used the little player figure, a bear, to explore the animated scenery around him. You'll never win that way, Ender smiled. Missed you at practice, Eli. I was there. But they had your army in a separate place. Looks like you're big time now. Can't play with the little boys anymore. You're a full cubit taller than I am. Cubit! Has God been telling you to build a boat or something, or are you in an archaic mood? Not archaic, just arcane. Secret, subtle, roundabout, I miss you already, you circumcised dog. Don't you know? We're enemies now. Next time I meet you in battle, I'll whip your ass. It was banter as always, but now there was too much truth behind it. Now when Ender heard Ally talk as if it were all a joke, he felt the pain of losing his friend and the worse pain of wondering if Ally really felt as little pain as he showed. "You can try," said Ender. "I taught you everything you know, but I didn't teach you everything I know." "I knew all along that you were holding something back, Ender." A pause. Ender's bear was in trouble on the screen. He climbed a tree. "I wasn't, Ally, holding anything back." "I know," said Ally. "Neither was I." "Salam, Ally." "Alas, it is not to be." "What isn't?" "Peace. It's what salam means. Peace be unto you." The words brought forth an echo from Ender's memory. His mother's voice reading to him softly when he was very young. "Think not that I am come to bring peace on earth. I came not to bring peace but a sword." Ender had pictured his mother piercing Peter the Terrible with a bloody rapier, and the words had stayed in his mind along with the image. In the silence, the bear died. It was a cute death with funny music. Ender turned around. Ally was already gone. Ender felt as if part of himself had been taken away, an inward prop that was holding up his courage and confidence. With Ally, to a degree impossible even with Shen, Ender had come to feel a unity so strong that the word "we" came to his lips much more easily than "I." But Ally had left something behind. Ender lay in bed, dozing into the night, and felt Ally's lips on his cheek as he muttered the word "peace." The kiss, the word, the peace were with him still. I am only what I remember, and Ally is my friend in a memory so intense that they can't tear him out. Like Valentine, the strongest memory of all. The next day he passed Ally in the corridor, and they greeted each other, touched hands, talked, but they both knew that there was a wall now. It might be breached, that wall, sometime in the future, but for now the only real conversation between them was the roots that had already grown low and deep under the wall where they could not be broken. The most terrible thing, though, was the fear that the wall could never be breached, that in his heart Ally was glad of the separation and was ready to be Ender's enemy. For now that they could not be together, they must be infinitely apart, and what had been sure and unshakable was now fragile and insubstantial. From the moment we are not together, Ally is a stranger, for he has a life now that will be no part of mine, and that means that when I see him we will not know each other. It made him sorrowful, but Ender did not weep. He was done with that. When they had turned Valentine into a stranger, when they had used her as a tool to work on Ender, from that day forward they could never hurt him deep enough to make him cry again. Ender was certain of that. And with that anger, he decided he was strong enough to defeat them, the teachers, his enemies.
You can't be serious about this schedule of battles.
Yes, I can.
He's only had his army 3.5 weeks.
I told you, we did computer simulations on probable results, and here's what the computer estimated Ender would do.
We want to teach him, not give him a nervous breakdown.
The computer knows him better than we do.
The computer is also not famous for having mercy.
If you wanted to be merciful, you should have gone to a monastery.
You mean this isn't a monastery?
This is best for Ender, too. We're bringing him to his full potential.
I thought we'd give him 2 years as commander. We usually give them a battle every 2 weeks, starting after 3 months. This is a little extreme.
Do we have 2 years to spare?
I know. I just have this picture of Ender a year from now. Completely useless, worn out, because he was pushed farther than he or any living person could go.
We told the computer that our highest priority was having the subject remain useful after the training program.
Well, as long as he's useful.
Look, Colonel Graff, you're the one who made me prepare this, over my protest, if you'll remember.
I know, you're right. I shouldn't burden you with my conscience. but my eagerness to sacrifice little children in order to save mankind is wearing thin. The Polomark has been to see the hegemon. It seems Russian intelligence is concerned that some of the active citizens on the nets are already figuring how America ought to use the IF to destroy the Warsaw Pact as soon as the buggers are destroyed.
It seems premature.
It seems insane. Free speech is one thing, but to jeopardize the League over nationalistic rivalries? And it's for people like that, short-sighted, suicidal people, that we're pushing Ender to the edge of human endurance.
I think you underestimate Ender.
But I fear that I also underestimate the stupidity of the rest of mankind. Are we absolutely sure that we ought to win this war?
Sir, those words sound like treason.
It was black humor.
It wasn't funny. When it comes to the buggers,
Nothing is funny, I know.
Ender Wiggin lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. Since becoming commander, he never slept more than 5 hours a night. But the lights went off at 2200 and didn't come on again until 0600. Sometimes he worked at his desk anyway, straining his eyes to use the dim display. Usually, though, he stared at the invisible ceiling and thought. Either the teachers had been kind to him after all, or he was a better commander than he thought. His ragged little troop of veterans, utterly without honor in their previous armies, were blossoming into capable leaders. So much so that instead of the usual 4 toons, he had created 5, each with a toon leader and a second. Every veteran had a position. He had the army drill in 8-man toon maneuvers and 4-man half-toons, so that at a single command his army could be assigned as many as 10 separate maneuvers and carry them out at once. No army had ever fragmented itself like that before, but Ender was not planning to do anything that had been done before either. Most armies practiced mass maneuvers, performed strategies. Ender had none. Instead, he trained his toon leaders to use their small units effectively in achieving limited goals, unsupported, alone on their own initiative. He staged mock wars after the first week, savage affairs in the practice room that left everybody exhausted. But he knew, with less than a month of training, that his army had the potential of being the best fighting group ever to play the game. How much of this did the teachers plan? Did they know they were giving him obscure but excellent boys? Did they give him 30 launchies, many of them underage, because they knew the little boys were quick learners, quick thinkers? Or was this what any similar group could become under a commander who knew what he wanted his army to do and knew how to teach them to do it? The question bothered him because he wasn't sure whether he was confounding or fulfilling their expectations. All he was sure of was that he was eager for battle. Most armies needed 3 months because they had to memorize dozens of elaboration formations. We're ready now. Get us into battle. The door opened in darkness. Ender listened. A shuffling step. The door closed. He rolled off his bunk and crawled in the darkness the 2 meters to the door. There was a slip of paper there. He couldn't read it, of course, but he knew what it was. Battle. How kind of them. I wish, and they deliver. Ender was already dressed in his Dragon Army flash suit when the lights came on. He ran down the corridor at once, and by 0601, he was at the door of his army's barracks. We have a battle with Rabbit Army at 0700. I want us warmed up in gravity and ready to go. Strip down and get to the gym. Bring your flash suits, and we'll go to the battle room from there. What about breakfast? I don't want anybody throwing up in the battle room. Can we at least take a leak first? No more than a deciliter. They laughed. The ones who didn't sleep naked stripped down. Everyone bundled up their flash suits and followed Ender at a jog through the corridors to the gym. He put them through the obstacle course twice, then split them into rotations on the tramp, the mat, and the bench. Don't wear yourselves out, just wake yourselves up. He didn't need to worry about exhaustion. They were in good shape, light and agile, and above all, excited about the battle to come. A few of them spontaneously began to wrestle. The gym, instead of being tedious, was suddenly fun because of the battle to come. Their confidence was the supreme confidence of those who have never been in the contest and think they are ready. Well, why shouldn't they think so? They are, and so am I. At 0640, he had them dress out. He talked to the toon leaders and their seconds while they dressed. Rabbit Army is mostly veterans, but Karn Karby was made their commander only 5 months ago, and I never fought them under him. He was a pretty good soldier, and Rabbit has done fairly well in the standings over the years. But I expect to see formations, and so I'm not worried. At 0650, he made them all lie down on the mats and relax. Then, at 0656, he ordered them up, and they jogged along the corridor to the battle room. Ender occasionally leaped up to touch the ceiling. The boys all jumped to touch the same spot on the ceiling. Their ribbon of color led to the left. Rabbit Army had already passed through to the right, and at 0658 they reached their gate to the battle room. The Toons lined up in 5 columns. A and E were ready to grab the side handholds and flip themselves out toward the sides. B and D lined up to catch the 2 parallel ceiling holds and flip upward into null gravity. C-Toon were ready to slap the sill of the doorway and flip downward. Up, down, left, right. Ender stood at the front between columns so he'd be out of the way and reoriented them. Which way is the enemy's gate? Down, they all said, laughing, and in that moment up became north, down became south, and left and right became east and west. The gray wall in front of them disappeared, and the battle room was visible. It wasn't a dark game, and it wasn't a bright one either. The lights were about half, like dusk. In the distance, in the dim light, he could see the enemy door, their lighted flash suits already pouring out. Ender knew a moment's pleasure. Everyone had learned the wrong lesson from Bonzo's misuse of Ender Wiggin. They all dumped through the door immediately so that there was no chance to do anything other than name the formation they would use. Commanders didn't have time to think. Well, Ender would take the time and trust his soldiers' ability to fight with flashed legs to keep them intact as they came late through the door. Ender sized up the shape of the battle room. The familiar open grid of most early games, like the monkey bars at the park, with 7 or 8 stars scattered through the grid. There were enough of them and in forward enough positions that they were worth going for. Spread to the near stars, Ender said. C, try to slide the wall. If it works, A and E will follow. If it doesn't, I'll decide from there. I'll be with D. Move. All the soldiers knew what was happening, but tactical decisions were entirely up to the Toon leaders. Even with Ender's instructions, they were only 10 seconds late getting through the gate. Rabbit Army was already doing some elaborate dance down at the end of the room. In all the other armies Ender had fought in, he would have been worrying right now about making sure he and his Toon were in their proper place in their own formation. Instead, he and all his men were only thinking of ways to slip around, past the formation, control the stars in the corners of the room, and then break the enemy formation into meaningless chunks that didn't know what they were doing. Even with less than 4 weeks together, the way they fought already seemed like the only intelligent way, the only possible way. Ender was almost surprised that Rabbit Army didn't know already that they were hopelessly out of date. C-Toon slipped along the wall, coasting with their bent knees facing the enemy. Crazy Tom, the leader of C-Toon, had apparently ordered his men to flash their own legs already. It was a pretty good idea in this dim light, since the lighted flash suits went dark wherever they were frozen. It made them less easily visible. Ender would commend him for that. Rabbit Army was able to drive back C-Toon's attack, but not until Crazy Tom and his boys had carved them up, freezing a dozen rabbits before retreating to the safety of a star. But it was a star behind the rabbit formation, which meant they were going to be easy pickings now. Hanzo, commonly called Hot Soup, was the leader of D-Toon. He slid quickly along the lip of the star to where Ender knelt. How about flipping off the north wall and kneeling on their faces? Do it, Ender said. I'll take B south to get behind them. Then he shouted, A and E slow on the walls. He slid footward along the star, hooked his feet on the lip, and flipped himself up to the top wall, then rebounded down to E-Toon's star. In a moment, he was leading them down against the south wall. They rebounded in near-perfect unison and came up behind the 2 stars that Karn Karby's soldiers were defending. It was like cutting butter with a hot knife. Rabbit Army was gone. Just a little cleanup left to do. Ender broke his Toons up into half-Toons to scour the corners for any enemy soldiers who were whole or merely damaged. In 3 minutes, his Toon leaders reported the room clean. Only one of Ender's boys was completely frozen. One of C-Toon, which had borne the brunt of the assault, and only 5 were disabled. Most were damaged, but those were leg shots and many of them were self-inflicted. All in all, it had gone even better than Ender expected. Ender had his toon leaders do the honors at the gate, 4 helmets at the corners, and Crazy Tom to pass through the gate. Most commanders took whoever was left alive to pass the gate. Ender could have picked practically anyone. A good battle. The lights went full, and Major Anderson himself came through the teacher gate at the south end of the battle room. He looked very solemn as he offered Ender the teacher hook that was ritually given to the victor in the game. Ender used it to thaw his own army's flash suits, of course, and he assembled them in toons before thawing the enemy. Crisp, military appearance, that's what he wanted when Carby and Rabbit Army got their bodies under control again. They may curse us and lie about us, but they'll remember that we destroyed them, and no matter what they say, other soldiers and other commanders will see that in their eyes. In those rabbit eyes, they'll see us in neat formation, victorious and almost undamaged in our first battle. Dragon Army isn't going to be an obscure name for long. Karn Carby came to Ender as soon as he was unfrozen. He was a 12-year-old who had apparently made commander only in his last year at the school. So he wasn't cocky like the ones who made it at 11. I will remember this, thought Ender, when I am defeated, to keep dignity and give honor where it's due so that defeat is not disgrace, and I hope I don't have to do it often. Anderson dismissed Dragon Army last, after Rabbit Army had straggled through the door that Ender's boys had come through. Then Ender led his army through the enemy's door. The light along the bottom of the door reminded them of which way was down once they got back to gravity. They all landed lightly on their feet, running. They assembled in the corridor. "It's 07:15, Ender said, "and that means you have 15 minutes for breakfast before I see you all in the battle room for the morning practice." He could hear them silently saying, "Come on, we won, let us celebrate." "All right," Ender answered, "you may. And you have your commander's permission to throw food at each other during breakfast." They laughed. They cheered. And then he dismissed them and sent them jogging on to the barracks. He caught his toon leaders on the way out and told them that he wouldn't expect anyone to come to practice until 07:45, and that practice would be over early so the boys could shower. Half an hour for breakfast, and no shower right after a battle. It was still stingy, but it would look lenient compared to 15 minutes, and Ender liked having the announcement of the extra 15 minutes come from the toon leaders. Let the boys learn that leniency comes from their toon leaders and harshness from their commander. It will bind them better in the small, tight knots of this fabric. Ender ate no breakfast. He wasn't hungry. Instead, he went to the bathroom and showered, putting his flash suit in the cleaner so it would be ready when he was dried off. He washed himself twice and let the water run and run on him. It would all be recycled. Let everybody drink some of my sweat today. They had given him an untrained army, and he had won. And not just nip and tuck either. He had won with only 6 frozen or disabled. Let's see how long other commanders keep using their formations now that they've seen what a flexible strategy can do. He was floating in the middle of the battle room when his soldiers began to arrive. No one spoke to him, of course. He would speak, they knew, when he was ready and not before. When all were there, Ender hooked himself near them and looked at them one by one. "Good first battle," he said, which was excuse enough for a cheer, and an attempt to start a chant of "Dragon, Dragon," which he quickly stopped. Dragon Army did all right against rabbits, but the enemy isn't always going to be that bad. If that had been a good army, Toon, your approach was too slow. They would have had you from the flanks before you got into good position. You should have split and angled in from 2 directions so they couldn't flank you. A&E, your aim was wretched. The tallies show that you averaged only 1 hit for every 2 soldiers. That means most of the hits were made by attacking soldiers close in. That can't go on. A competent army would cut up the assault force unless they have much better cover from the soldiers at a distance. I want every toon to work on distance marksmanship at moving and unmoving targets. Half toons, take turns being targets. I'll thaw the flash suits every 3 minutes. Now move." "Will we have any stars to work with?" asked Hot Soup. "To steady our aim." "I don't want you to get used to having something to steady your arms. If your arm isn't steady, freeze your elbows. Now move." The toon leaders quickly got things going, and Ender moved from group to group to make suggestions and help soldiers who were having particular trouble. The soldiers knew by now that Ender could be brutal in the way he talked to groups, but when he worked with an individual, he was always patient, explaining as often as necessary, making suggestions quietly, listening to questions and problems and explanations. But he never laughed when they tried to banter with him, and they soon stopped trying. He was commander every moment they were together. He never had to remind them of it. He simply was. They worked all day with the taste of victory in their mouths and cheered again when they broke half an hour early for lunch. Ender held the toon leaders until the regular lunch hour to talk about the tactics they had used and evaluate the work of their individual soldiers. Then he went to his own room and methodically changed into his uniform for lunch. He would enter the commander's mess about 10 minutes late, exactly the timing that he wanted. Since this was his first victory, he had never seen the inside of the commander's mess hall and had no idea what new commanders were expected to do. But he did know that he wanted to enter last today, when the scores of the morning's battles were already posted. Dragon Army will not be an obscure name now. There was no great stir when he came in. But when some of them noticed how small he was and saw the dragons on the sleeves of the uniform, they stared at him openly, and by the time he got his food and sat at a table, the room was silent. Ender began to eat, slowly and carefully, pretending not to notice that he was the center of attention. Gradually conversation and noise started up again, and Ender could relax enough to look around. One entire wall of the room was a scoreboard. Soldiers were kept aware of an army's overall record for the past 2 years. In here, however, records were kept for each commander. A new commander couldn't inherit a good standing from his predecessor. He was ranked according to what he had done. Ender had the best ranking. A perfect one-lost record, of course, but in the other categories he was far ahead. Average soldiers disabled, average enemy disabled, average time elapsed before victory, in every category he was ranked first. When he was nearly through eating, someone came up behind him and touched his shoulder. "Mind if I sit?" Ender didn't have to turn around to know it was Dink Meeker. "Oh, Dink," said Ender, "sit." "You gold-plated fart," said Dink cheerfully. "We're all trying to decide whether your scores up there are a miracle or a mistake." "A habit," said Ender. "One victory is not a habit," Dink said. "Don't get cocky. When you're new, they send you against weak commanders. Karn Karby isn't exactly on the bottom of the rankings." It was true. Karby was just about in the middle. "He's okay," Dink said, "considering that he only just started. Shows some promise." "You don't show promise. You show threat." "Threat to what? Do they feed you less if I win? I thought you told me that this was all a stupid game and none of it mattered." Dink didn't like having his words thrown back at him, not under these circumstances. "You were the one who got me playing along with them, but I'm not playing games with you, Ender. You won't beat me." "Probably not," Ender said. "I taught you," Dink said. "Everything I know," said Ender. "I'm just playing it by ear right now." "Congratulations," said Dink. "It's good to know I have a friend here." But Ender wasn't sure Dink was his friend anymore. Neither was Dink. After a few empty sentences, Dink went back to his table. Ender looked around when he was through with his meal. There were quite a few small conversations going on. Ender spotted Bonzo, who was now one of the oldest commanders. Rose the Nose had graduated. Petra was with a group in a far corner, and she didn't look at him once. Since most of the others stole glances at him from time to time, including the ones Petra was talking with, Ender was pretty sure she was deliberately avoiding his glance. That's the problem with winning right from the start, thought Ender. You lose friends. Give them a few weeks to get used to it. By the time I have my next battle, things will have calmed down in here. Karn Karby made a point of coming to greet Ender before the lunch period ended. It was again a gracious gesture, and unlike Dink, Karby did not seem wary. "Right now I'm in disgrace," he said frankly. "They won't believe me when I tell them you did things that nobody's ever seen before. So I hope you beat the snot out of the next army you fight, as a favor to me." "As a favor to you," Ender said, "and thanks for talking to me." I think they're treating you pretty badly. Usually new commanders are cheered when they first join the mess. But then usually a new commander has had a few defeats under his belt before he first makes it in here. I only got in here a month ago. If anybody deserves a cheer, it's you. But that's life. Make 'em eat dust. I'll try. Karn Karby left, and Ender mentally added him to his private list of people who also qualified as human beings. That night, Ender slept better than he had in a long time. Slept so well, in fact, that he didn't wake up until the lights came on. He woke up feeling good, jogged on out to take a shower, and did not notice the piece of paper on his floor until he came back and started dressing in his uniform. He only saw the paper because it moved in the wind as he snapped out the uniform to put it on. He picked up the paper and read it. Petra Arkanian, Phoenix Army, 0700. It was his old army, the one he had left less than 4 weeks before, and he knew their formations backward and forward. Partly because of Ender's influence, they were the most flexible of armies, responding relatively quickly to new situations. Phoenix Army would be the best able to cope with Ender's fluid, unpatterned attack. The teachers were determined to make life interesting for him. 0700, said the paper, and it was already 0630. Some of his boys might already be heading for breakfast. Ender tossed his uniform aside, grabbed his flash suit, and in a moment stood in the doorway of his army's barracks. "Gentlemen, I hope you learned something yesterday, because today we're doing it again." It took a moment for them to realize that he meant a battle, not a practice. It had to be a mistake, they said. Nobody ever had battles 2 days in a row. He handed the paper to Fly Molo, the leader of Atun, who immediately shouted, "Flash suits!" and started changing clothes. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" demanded Hot Soup. Hot had a way of asking Ender questions that nobody else dared ask. "I thought you needed a shower," Ender said. "Yesterday, Rabbit Army claimed we only won because the stink knocked them out." The soldiers who heard him laughed. "Didn't find the paper till you got back from the showers, right?" Ender looked for the source of the voice. It was Bean, already in his flash suit, looking insolent. "Time to repay old humiliations, is that it, Bean?" "Of course," Ender said contemptuously. "I'm not as close to the floor as you are." More laughter. Bean flushed with anger. "It's plain we can't count on old ways of doing things," Ender said, "so you'd better plan on battles any time, and often. I can't pretend I like the way they're screwing around with us, but I do like one thing, that I've got an army that can handle it." After that, if he had asked them to follow him to the moon without spacesuits, they would have done it. Petra was not Karn Karby. She had more flexible patterns and responded much more quickly to Ender's darting, improvised, unpredictable attack. As a result, Ender had 3 boys flashed and 9 disabled at the end of the battle. Petra was not gracious about bowing over his hand at the end either. The anger in her eyes seemed to say, "I was your friend, and you humiliate me like this." Ender pretended not to notice her fury. He figured that after a few more battles she'd realize that in fact she had scored more hits against him than he expected anyone ever would again. And he was still learning from her. In practice today he would teach his Toon leaders how to counter the tricks Petra had played on them. Soon they would be friends again. He hoped. At the end of the week, Dragon Army had fought 7 battles in 7 days. The score stood 7 wins and 0 losses. Ender had never had more losses than in the battle with Phoenix Army, and in 2 battles he had suffered not 1 soldier, frozen or disabled. No one believed anymore that it was a fluke that put him first in the standings. He had beaten top armies by unheard-of margins. It was no longer possible for the other commanders to ignore him. A few of them sat with him at every meal, carefully trying to learn from him how he had defeated his most recent opponents. He told them freely, confident that few of them would know how to train their soldiers and their Toon leaders to duplicate what his could do. And while Ender talked with a few commanders, much larger groups gathered around the opponents Ender had defeated, trying to find out how Ender might be beaten. There were many, too, who hated him for being young, for being excellent, for having made their victories look paltry and weak. Ender saw it first in their faces when he passed them in the corridors. Then he began to notice that some boys would get up in a group and move to another table if he sat near them in the commander's mess, and there began to be elbows that accidentally jostled him in the game room, feet that got entangled with his when he walked into and out of the gym, spittle and wads of wet paper that struck him from behind as he jogged through the corridors. They couldn't beat him in the battle room and knew it, so instead they would attack him where it was safe, where he was not a giant but just a little boy. Ender despised them, but secretly, so secretly that he didn't even know it himself, he feared them. It was just such little torments that Peter had always used, and Ender was beginning to feel far too much at home. These annoyances were petty, though, and Ender persuaded himself to accept them as another form of praise. Already the other armies were beginning to imitate Ender. Now most soldiers attacked with knees tucked under them. Formations were breaking up now, and more commanders were sending out tunes to slip along the walls. None had caught on yet to Ender's 5-tune organization. It gave him the slight advantage that, when they had accounted for the movements of 4 units, they wouldn't be looking for a 5th. Ender was teaching them all about null-gravity tactics. But where could Ender go to learn new things? He began to use the video room, filled with propaganda vids about Mazer Rackham and other great commanders of the forces of humanity in the first and second invasion. Ender stopped the general practice an hour early and allowed his tune leaders to conduct their own practice in his absence. Usually they staged skirmishes, tune against tune. Ender stayed long enough to see that things were going well, then left to watch the old battles. Most of the vids were a waste of time. Heroic music, close-ups of commanders and medal-winning soldiers, confused shots of Marines invading bugger installations. But here and there he found useful sequences. Ships like points of light maneuvering in the dark of space. Or better still, the lights on shipboard plotting screens showing the whole of a battle. It was hard from the videos to see all 3 dimensions, and the scenes were often short and unexplained, but Ender began to see how well the buggers used seemingly random flight paths to create confusion, how they used decoys and false retreats to draw the IF ships into traps. Some battles had been cut into many scenes which were scattered through the various videos. By watching them in sequence, Ender was able to reconstruct whole battles. He began to see things that the official commentators never mentioned. They were always trying to arouse pride in human accomplishments and loathing of the buggers, but Ender began to wonder how humanity had won at all. Human ships were sluggish. Fleets responded to new circumstances unbearably slowly, while the bugger fleet seemed to act in perfect unity, responding to each challenge instantly. Of course, in the first invasion, the human ships were completely unsuited to fast combat, but then so were the bugger ships. It was only in the second invasion that the ships and weapons were swift and deadly. So it was from the buggers, not the humans, that Ender learned strategy. He felt ashamed and afraid of learning from them, since they were the most terrible enemy, ugly and murderous and loathsome. But they were also very good at what they did. To a point. They always seemed to follow one basic strategy only: gather the greatest number of ships at the key point of conflict. They never did anything surprising, anything that seemed to show either brilliance or stupidity in a subordinate officer. Discipline was apparently very tight. And there was one oddity. There was plenty of talk about Mazer Rackham, but precious little video of his actual battle. Some scenes from early in the battle, Rackham's tiny force looking pathetic against the vast power of the main bugger fleet. The buggers had already beaten the main human fleet out in the Comet Shield, wiping out the earliest starships and making a mockery of human attempts at high strategy. That film was often shown to arouse again and again the agony and terror of bugger victory. Then the fleet coming to Mazer Rackham's little force near Saturn, the hopeless odds, and then one shot from Mazer Rackham's little cruiser. One enemy ship blowing up. That's all that was ever shown. Lots of film showing Marines carving their way into bugger ships, lots of bugger corpses lying around inside, but no film of buggers killing in personal combat unless it was spliced in from the first invasion. It frustrated Ender that Mazer Rackham's victory was so obviously censored. Students in the battle school had much to learn from Mazer Rackham, and everything about his victory was concealed from view. The passion for secrecy was not very helpful to the children who had to learn to accomplish again what Mazer Rackham had done. Of course, as soon as word got around that Ender Wiggin was watching the war vids over and over again, the video room began to draw a crowd. Almost all were commanders, watching the same vids Ender watched, pretending they understood why he was watching and what he was getting out of it. Ender never explained anything. Even when he showed 7 scenes from the same battle, but from different vids, only one boy asked tentatively, "Are some of those from the same battle?" Ender only shrugged, as if it didn't matter. It was during the last hour of practice on the 7th day, only a few hours after Ender's army had won its 7th battle, that Major Anderson himself came into the video room. He handed a slip of paper to one of the commanders sitting there and then spoke to Ender. "Colonel Graff wishes to see you in his office immediately." Ender got up and followed Anderson through the corridors. Anderson palmed the locks that kept students out of the officers' quarters. Finally, they came to where Graff had taken root on a swivel chair bolted to the steel floor. His belly spilled over both armrests now, even when he sat upright. Ender tried to remember. Graff hadn't seemed particularly fat at all when Ender first met him, only 4 years ago. Time and tension were not being kind to the administrator of the battle school. 7 days since your first battle, Ender, said Graff. Ender did not reply. And you won 7 battles, once a day. Ender nodded. Your scores are unusually high, too. Ender blinked. To what, Commander, do you attribute your remarkable success? You gave me an army that does whatever I can think for it to do. And what have you thought for it to do? We orient downward toward the enemy gate and use our lower legs as a shield. We avoid formations and keep our mobility. It helps that I've got 5 tunes of 8 instead of 4 of 10. Also, our enemies haven't the time to respond effectively to our new techniques, so we keep beating them with the same tricks. That won't hold up for long. So you don't expect to keep winning? Not with the same tricks. Graff nodded. Sit down, Ender. Ender and Anderson both sat. Graff looked at Anderson, and Anderson spoke next. What condition is your army in, fighting so often? They're all veterans now. But how are they doing? Are they tired? If they are, they won't admit it. Are they still alert? You're the ones with the computer games that play with people's minds. You tell me. We know what we know. We want to know what you know. These are very good soldiers, Major Anderson. I'm sure they have limits, but we haven't reached them yet. Some of the newer ones are having trouble because they never really mastered some basic techniques, but they're working hard and improving. What do you want me to say? That they need to rest? Of course they need to rest. They need a couple of weeks off. Their studies are shot to hell. None of us are doing any good in our classes. But you know that. And apparently you don't care, so why should I? Graff and Anderson exchanged glances. Ender, why are you studying the videos of the Bugger Wars? To learn strategy, of course. Those videos were created for propaganda purposes. All our strategies have been edited out. I know. Graff and Anderson exchanged glances again. Graff drummed on his table. You don't play the fantasy game anymore, he said. Ender didn't answer. Tell me why you don't play it. Because I won. You never win everything in that game. There's always more. I won. Ender, we want to help you be as happy as possible, but if you want to make me the best soldier possible, go down and look at the standings. Look at the all-time standings. So far you're doing an excellent job with me. Congratulations. Now when are you going to put me up against a good army? Graff's set lips turned to a smile, and he shook a little with silent laughter. Anderson handed Ender a slip of paper. Now, he said. Bonzo, Madrid, Salamander Army, 1200. That's 10 minutes from now, said Ender. My army will be in the middle of showering up after practice. Graff smiled. Better hurry then, boy. He got to his army's barracks 5 minutes later. Most were dressing after their showers. Some had already gone to the game room or the video room to wait for lunch. He sent 3 younger boys to call everyone in, and made everyone else dress for battle as quickly as they could. "This one's hot, and there's no time," Ender said. "They gave Bonzo notice about 20 minutes ago, and by the time we get to the door, they'll have been inside for a good 5 minutes at least." The boys were outraged, complaining loudly in the slang that they usually avoided around the commander. "What they doing to us? They be crazy, nay? Forget why. We'll worry about that tonight. Are you tired?" Fly Molo answered, "We worked our butts off in practice today, not to mention beating the crap out of Ferret Army this morning." "Same day nobody ever do 2 battles," said Crazy Tom. Ender answered in the same tone, "Nobody ever beat Dragon Army either. This be your big chance to lose?" Ender's taunting question was the answer to their complaints. Win first, ask questions later. All of them were back in the room, and most of them were dressed. "Move!" shouted Ender, and they ran along behind him, some of them still dressing when they reached the corridor outside the battle room. Many of them were panting, a bad sign. They were too tired for this battle. The door was already open. There were no stars at all, just empty space in a dazzlingly bright room. Nowhere to hide, not even in darkness. "My heart," said Crazy Tom. "They haven't come out yet either." Ender put his hand across his own mouth to tell them to be silent. With the door open, of course, the enemy could hear every word they said. Ender pointed all around the door to tell them that Salamander Army was undoubtedly deployed against the wall all around the door, where they couldn't be seen but could easily flash anyone who came out. Ender motioned for them all to back away from the door. Then he pulled forward a few of the taller boys, including Crazy Tom, and made them kneel, not squatting back to sit on their heels, but fully upright so they formed an L with their bodies. He flashed them. In silence, the army watched him. He selected the smallest boy, Bean, handed him Tom's gun, and made Bean kneel on Tom's frozen legs. Then he pulled Bean's hands, each holding a gun, through Tom's armpits. Now the boys understood. Tom was a shield, an armored spacecraft, and Bean was hiding inside. He was certainly not invulnerable, but he would have time. Ender assigned 2 more boys to throw Tom and Bean through the door, but signaled them to wait. He went on through the army, quickly assigning groups of 4, a shield, a shooter, and 2 throwers. Then, when all were frozen or armed or ready to throw, he signaled the throwers to pick up their burdens, throw them through the door, and then jump through themselves. "Move!" shouted Ender. They moved. 2 at a time, the shield pairs went through the door, backward, so that the shield would be between the shooter and the enemy. The enemy opened fire at once, but they mostly hit the frozen boy in front. In the meantime, with 2 guns to work with and their targets neatly lined up and spread flat along the wall, the dragons had an easy time of it. It was almost impossible to miss. And as the throwers also jumped through the door, they got handholds on the same wall with the enemy, shooting at a deadly angle so that the salamanders couldn't figure out whether to shoot at the shield pair, slaughtering them from above, or the throwers shooting at them from their own level. By the time Ender himself came through the door, the battle was over. It hadn't taken a full minute from the time the first dragon passed through the door until the shooting stopped. Dragon had lost 20, frozen or disabled, and only 12 boys were undamaged. It was their worst score yet, but they had won. When Major Anderson came out and gave Ender the hook, Ender could not contain his anger. "I thought you were going to put us against an army that could match us in a fair fight." "Congratulations on the victory, Commander." "Bean," shouted Ender, "if you had commanded Salamander Army, what would you have done?" Bean, disabled but not completely frozen, called out from where he drifted near the enemy door. "Keep a shifting pattern of movement going in front of the door. You never hold still when the enemy knows exactly where you are." "As long as you're cheating," Ender said to Anderson, "why don't you train the other army to cheat intelligently?" "I suggest that you remobilize your army," said Anderson. Ender pressed the buttons to thaw both armies at once. "Dragon Army dismissed," he shouted immediately. There would be no elaborate formation to accept the surrender of the other army. This had not been a fair fight, even though they had won. The teachers had meant them to lose, and it was only Bonzo's ineptitude that had saved them. There was no glory in that. Only as Ender himself was leaving the battle room did he realize that Bonzo would not realize that Ender was angry at the teachers. Spanish honor. Bonzo would only know that he had been defeated even when the odds were stacked in his favor. That Ender had had the youngest child in his army publicly state what Bonzo should have done to win, and that Ender had not even stayed to receive Bonzo's dignified surrender. If Bonzo had not already hated Ender, he would surely have begun, and hating him as he did, this would surely turn his rage murderous. Bonzo was the last person to strike me, thought Ender. I'm sure he has not forgotten that. Nor had he forgotten the bloody affair in the battle room when the older boys tried to break up Ender's practice session. Nor had many others. They were hungry for blood then. Bonzo would be thirsting for it now. Ender toyed with the idea of taking advanced personal defense, but with battles now possible not only every day but twice in the same day, Ender knew he could not spare the time. I'll have to take my chances. The teachers got me into this. They can keep me safe.
Bean flopped down on his bunk in utter exhaustion. Half the boys in the barracks were already asleep, and it was still 15 minutes before lights out. Wearily, he pulled his desk from its locker and signed on. There was a test tomorrow in geometry, and Bean was woefully unprepared. He could always reason things out if he had enough time, and he had read Euclid when he was 5, but the test had a time limit, so there wouldn't be a chance to think. He had to know. And he didn't know. And he would probably do badly on the test, but they had won twice today, and so he felt good. As soon as he signed on, however, all thoughts of geometry were banished. A message paraded around the desk. See me at once. Ender. The time was 21:50, only 10 minutes before lights out. How long ago had Ender sent it? Still, he'd better not ignore it. There might be another battle in the morning. The thought made him weary, and whatever Ender wanted to talk to him about, there wouldn't be time then. So Bean rolled off the bunk and walked emptily through the corridor to Ender's room. He knocked. "Come in," said Ender. "Just saw your message." "Fine," said Ender. "It's near lights out. I'll help you find your way in the dark." "I just didn't know if you knew what time it was." "I always know what time it is." Bean sighed inwardly. It never failed. Whenever he had any conversation with Ender, it turned into an argument. Bean hated it. He recognized Ender's genius and honored him for it. Why couldn't Ender ever see anything good in him? "Remember 4 weeks ago, Bean, when you told me to make you a tune leader?" "Huh? I've made 5 tune leaders and 5 assistants since then, and none of them was you." Ender raised his eyebrows. "Was I right?" "Yes, sir." "So tell me how you've done in these 8 battles." "Today was the first time they disabled me, but the computer listed me as getting 11 hits before I had to stop. I've never had less than 5 hits in a battle. I've also completed every assignment I've been given." "Why did they make you a soldier so young, Bean?" "No younger than you were. But why?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. And so do I." "I've tried to guess, but they're just guesses. You're very good. They knew that. They pushed you ahead. Tell me why, Bean." "Because they need us, that's why." Bean sat down on the floor and stared at Ender's feet. "Because they need somebody to beat the buggers. That's the only thing they care about." "It's important that you know that, Bean. Because most boys in this school think the game is important for itself, but it isn't. It's only important because it helps them find kids who might grow up to be real commanders in the real war. But as for the game, screw that. That's what they're doing. Screwing up the game. Funny. I thought they were just doing it to us. A game 9 weeks earlier than it should have come. A game every day. And now 2 games in the same day. Bean, I don't know what the teachers are doing, but my army is getting tired. And I'm getting tired, and they don't care at all about the rules of the game. I've pulled the old charts up from the computer. No one has ever destroyed so many enemies and kept so many of his own soldiers whole in the history of the game. You're the best, Ender. Ender shook his head. Maybe. But it was no accident that I got the soldiers I got. Launchies, rejects from other armies, but put them together and my worst soldier could be a toon leader in another army. They've loaded things my way, but now they're loading it all against me. Bean, they want to break us down. They can't break you. You'd be surprised. Ender breathed sharply, suddenly, as if there were a stab of pain, or he had to catch a sudden breath in a wind. Bean looked at him and realized that the impossible was happening. Far from baiting him, Ender Wiggin was actually confiding in him. Not much, but a little. Ender was human, and Bean had been allowed to see. Maybe you'll be surprised, said Bean. There's a limit to how many clever new ideas I can come up with every day. Somebody's going to come up with something to throw at me that I haven't thought of before, and I won't be ready. What's the worst that could happen? You lose one game. Yes. That's the worst that could happen. I can't lose any games. Because if I lose any... He didn't explain himself. And Bean didn't ask. I need you to be clever, Bean. I need you to think of solutions to problems we haven't seen yet. I want you to try things that no one has ever tried because they're absolutely stupid. Why me? Because even though there are some better soldiers than you in Dragon Army, not many, but some, there's nobody who can think better and faster than you. Bean said nothing. They both knew it was true. Ender showed him his desk. On it were 12 names, 2 or 3 from each toon. Choose 5 of these, said Ender. 1 from each toon. They're a special squad, and you'll train them. Only during the extra practice sessions. Talk to me about what you're training them to do. Don't spend too long on any one thing. Most of the time, you and your squad will be part of the whole army, part of your regular toons. But when I need you, when there's something to be done that only you can do. These are all new, said Bean. No veterans. After last week, Bean, all our soldiers are veterans. Don't you realize that on the individual soldier standings, all 40 of our soldiers are in the top 50? That you have to go down 17 places to find a soldier who isn't a dragon? What if I can't think of anything? Then I was wrong about you. Bean grinned. You weren't wrong. The lights went out. Can you find your way back, Bean? Probably not. Then stay here. If you listen very carefully, you can hear the good fairy come in the night and leave our assignment for tomorrow. They won't give us another battle tomorrow, will they? Ender didn't answer. Bean heard him climb into bed. He got up from the floor and did likewise. He thought of a half-dozen ideas before he went to sleep. Ender would be pleased. Every one of them was stupid.
General Pace, please sit down. I understand you have come to me about a matter of some urgency.
Ordinarily, Colonel Graff, I would not presume to interfere with the internal workings of the battle school. Your autonomy is guaranteed, and despite our difference in ranks, I am quite aware that it is my authority only to advise, not to order you to take action.
Action?
Do not be disingenuous with me, Colonel Graff. Americans are quite apt at playing stupid when they choose to, but I am not to be deceived. You know why I am here.
Ah. I guess this means DAP filed a report.
He feels paternal toward the students here. He feels your neglect of a potentially lethal situation is more than negligence, that it borders on conspiracy to cause the death or serious injury of one of the students here.
This is a school for children, General Pace. Hardly a matter to bring the chief of IF military police here for.
Colonel Graff, the name of Ender Wiggin has percolated through the High Command. It has even reached my ears. I have heard him described modestly as our only hope for victory in the upcoming invasion. When it is his life or health that is in danger, I do not think it untoward that the military police take some interest in preserving and protecting the boy. Do you?
Damn Dap, and damn you too, sir. I know what I'm doing.
Do you?
Better than anyone else.
Oh, that is obvious, since nobody else has the faintest idea what you're doing. You have known for 8 days that there is a conspiracy among some of the more vicious of these children to cause the beating of Ender Wiggin if they can, and that some members of this conspiracy, notably the boy named Bonito de Madrid, commonly called Bonzo, are quite likely to exhibit no self-restraint when this punishment takes place, so that Ender Wiggin, an inestimably important international resource, will be placed in serious danger of having his brains pasted on the walls of your orbiting schoolhouse. And you, fully warned of this danger, propose to do exactly
nothing.
You can see how this excites our puzzlement.
Ender Wiggin has been in this situation before. Back on Earth, the day he lost his monitor, and again when a large group of older boys...
I did not come here ignorant of the past. Ender Wiggin has provoked Bonzo Madrid beyond human endurance, and you have no military police standing by to break up disturbances. It is unconscionable.
When Ender Wiggin holds our fleets in his control, when he must make the decisions that bring us victory or destruction, will there be military police to come save him if things get out of hand?
I fail to see the connection.
Obviously. But the connection is there. Ender Wiggin must believe that no matter what happens, no adult will ever step in to help him in any way. He must believe, to the core of his soul, that he can only do what he and the other children work out for themselves. If he does not believe that, then he will never reach the peak of his abilities.
He will also not reach the peak of his abilities if he is dead or permanently crippled.
He won't be.
Why don't you simply graduate Bonzo? He's old enough.
Because Ender knows that Bonzo plans to kill him. If we transfer Bonzo ahead of schedule, he'll know that we saved him. Heaven knows Bonzo isn't a good enough commander to be promoted on merit.
What about the other children? Getting them to help him?
We'll see what happens. That is my first, final, and only decision.
God help you if you're wrong.
God help us all if I'm wrong.
I'll have you before a capital court-martial. I'll have your name disgraced throughout the world if you're wrong.
Fair enough. But do remember, if I happen to be right, to make sure I get a few dozen medals.
For what?
For keeping you from meddling.